You're listening to Tech Me Seriously with Sarah Tenisi, CEO of Tenisi Tech. Candid conversations with driven technology and business professionals who've always got something interesting to say.
Hello, I'm Sarah Tenisi, the host of Tech Me Seriously and the CEO of Tenisi Tech. We're an IT services firm headquartered in California. Today, I'll be speaking with Kathy Sebuck. Kathy is an award-winning strategic thinker, entrepreneurial leader, athlete, author, public speaker, and CMO with over 25 years of corporate tech sales and marketing leadership expertise. She's worked for startups and Fortune 500 enterprises, as well as working across all sectors in the public, private, and nonprofit sector. As the founder of Marchitecture, Kathy provides fractional CMO business consulting. Based on her book, Waves of Change, she also created an interactive learning platform called the Connected Balance Experience to help leaders build more effective decision-making skills using a growth mindset and tools backed by neuroscience. Welcome, Kathy.
Thanks so much for having me, Sarah. I'm so excited to have this conversation.
I am too. This has been in the works for a couple of years. It's had a couple of fits and starts. So I'm really excited to talk about this. And today, our topic is unplugging for more connected balance. So I feel like we need to start at the top. What do you mean by connected balance?
Connected balance was a term that I came up with because I didn't have any. No surprise. Through my own crash and burn and experiential learning, which is how I operate, I realized that I just really wasn't connected. And what I mean by that is we're always connected here. We're always listening to our brain. Our brain always has an agenda, always has a task list, always has goals, objectives, and runs us into the ground every day of the week if we let it. And of course, that's the programming we get. And that's the programming society creates. All of us type A plusers who get into tech or corporate or whatever, we just work. And then we want to achieve and we keep raising our bar and we keep raising our goals. And that's all great. Don't get me wrong. It's the best boot camp you could get. But when you really start to look at and take an inventory personally about what is that doing to me physically? How do I feel about it? Because, we never talk about our feelings.
Never think about that.
And so connected balance really is working from the whole self, heart, mind, and body. Our body has intuitive wisdom. Our heart tells us something different, and our electromagnetic field is huge. And if all three of those are connected and operating as one, you would be amazed at how much clarity you get and how much better your decision-making capability becomes. Because how many times, and I know we've all felt this, where you have a decision to make and your head's telling you, yeah, but your gut is screaming at you for some reason not to either do this or follow up on this or whatever the situation is, and you ignore your gut. And sure enough, 30 days, 60 days, however long it is, later you realize this was not a good idea. Versus if you were operating collectively and you actually took a pause and said, how do I feel about this? How do I think about this? And how is this going to connect with me personally? You just make better decisions.
And I think we do have, I thought I had it in my outline to talk about this, but you just mentioned it, like your heart and the electromagnetic fields. You've done a ton of research. Like this is not some woo-woo thing that you came up with. You've done probably a decade of research or more, right? And trying to figure out all this out. And you talked about gut feeling and sort of listening to your gut, listening to your heart. Like talk about what you learned from that, because I think that's one of most impressive things that I read in your book. And it was like, when you wrote about the heart, and you're going to describe this because I can't do it justice, but I wrote next to that section in your book, gut feeling. So is it your gut or is it your heart? And tell us about that.
So it's both. We talk about our second brain or any of those other connections, not just our regular brain, our logic, but our intuition. When you look at the science behind what we call coherence, and coherence is measurable, and Heart Math, or the Institute of Heart Math, has been measuring and looking at this since 1991. And this is not, like you said, this woo-woo, it doesn't really matter. This is actually scientific proof. And if you look at how athletes have been trained, and this is actually how I was originally introduced to it more than a decade ago, is when you talk about heart rate variability and how the body actually works together When people talk about getting in the zone, that's a coherent state. And that's something that's trainable. And so when you hear about athletes talking about visualization or breathing techniques or all the things to calm down the nervous system, which is, we're used to fight or flight all the time because we're constantly in stress crash mode, that calmness is really what coherence is, which is measurable. They have devices, watches, ear clips, all kinds of things, and breathing exercises, which, of course, that's the newest thing now is breath work, but it's not even that kind of breath where you're getting yourself into an altered state. It's more about calming down the nervous system. And so that coherence really is, and HeartMath's focus is really about just resetting your personal resilience. And the less stress and the less fight or flight you live in, the less cortisol and the better you feel. It's just we're always on, moving, shaking, doing, that we don't allow our bodies to reset. And so for somebody like me, who's a type A pluser and was doing 50,000 things a day because I'm a high energy person, I don't stop those things, but I take inventory now and look at, okay, how does my nervous system feel? And, this is, if you've had too much caffeine, you can have that kind of overload all the time. And so that coherence is really something that you can check into, monitor, or better yet, just feel. Like to your point about your gut, when you're overly stressed, when something doesn't feel right, if you stop long enough to pay attention.
And you talked about that, right? You talked about, really the problem is that we're all on autopilot. And so we're not giving ourselves an opportunity to just stop and say, how am I feeling today? And, as a society, a lot of us are very driven and very ambitious. And I know exactly what you're talking about. And a lot of people know that I moved down to San Diego from Silicon Valley about 4 or 5 years ago. And I literally woke up one day and thought, oh my God, I'm exhausted. The grind just has me ground down. Like I'm done. And I picked up and moved. And this is a little bit of a more, for me, balanced environment. And so I know exactly what you're talking about, but what happens with the autopilot? Why do so many people get trapped in it?
Well, I think if you really peel it back, and I have to laugh, Sarah, because I was the same person. 2020, I had to leave DC. I had been there for 18 years. I was on the wheel,
Yes, we're on the wheel.
We're on the wheel of go, 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 do. And when the pandemic hit, I will never forget my girlfriend said, this is your opportunity in chaos. You've wanted to leave this area for 2 to 3 years, go. And I was like, oh, she's right. I could totally sell my house and move. And it wasn't because I hated the area. It wasn't because, I needed to get out. But to your point, I needed a change and I was exhausted. And it wasn't so much that my job was terrible or whatever it was. I just was ready for a new chapter of peace because I had just been grinding for so many years through jobs, through illnesses, through promotions, through all the things that my brain kept telling me I needed to do versus just calming down. And I think to your point, the autopilot piece is the programming, better, stronger, faster. I have to get here. I have to do this. I have to get this job title. I have to make this money. I have to. And it's like, no, you don't. And I'm not saying you have to disassociate and walk away from society because there's certainly plenty of people who have figured this out. I think what happens is the autopilot gets in the way and we don't realize we can find the balance, but we have to really look at what is driving our incessant workaholism. That's an inside job. That's external validation. That's an inside job. And so you have to ask yourself, why am I being driven this hard? What am I trying to truly get to? Is it a self-worth issue? Is it, I don't feel like I'm enough, whatever it is. None of us are perfect. We all have those blind spots or those wounds, call it what you want. But unless you really slow down long enough to say, what's driving me? What makes me really tick? And am I happy doing what I'm doing? If you are and you want to run yourself into the ground, great. I know plenty of people that are on the other side of the spectrum that are so happy doing what they're doing that they have the same burnout problem because it's another addiction. It's another dopamine hit. It's just a different kind. So it really goes back to finding that balance between how much is too much, what's enough, and what's enough for me as a person that I can still do all these amazing things, but am I getting enough sleep? Am I making time for lunch? Am I taking bathroom breaks? Am I so busy? I mean, that this world today, of course, is still handing out busy badges. It's like, oh, good for you. You work 12 hours a day. It's like, you're insane. We're all insane. We've all been there versus finding that balance between I can work hard, but I also can rest hard and I can play hard.
Do you think that this is more of an issue in the tech sector? I mean, we both worked in tech, right? So maybe we're a little bit, I don't know, jaded, or of course it's a tech problem. I mean, you talk about it being certainly as across professions, but there is an element to tech that is about constant drive, constant innovation, constant, in my world, service, knowing what's coming out. And I mean, it's really hard to say, hey, I just need like a month off. And you're right, plenty of people have figured this out. So this could just be a Kathy Sarah problem, but we know it's not. But do you know what I'm saying? So like, is it a tech problem?
Well, let's be honest. The tech sector is set up for this behavior to be rewarded. There's no doubt about that. We've all lived it. Work harder, get paid more, get promoted. I do think, though, there are more yes and. I think originally when tech hatched, when we were all first getting in there and, we're going to date ourselves to the .com and all these things were happening, it was the race to the internet. And now 20 plus years later, we can stop racing. We have cloud, we have AI, we have all these, and whatever the next shiny object is, like right now it's AI. Before AI, it was cloud. Before that, it was thin client computing. Like you can see.
Yes, yep, exactly right. Exactly right.
This is what tech does. Especially we just watched the government have to go through this because of Elon. We disrupt, we capitalize, we monetize. That's what tech does. So if you know that, you're not caught off guard, and B, you can work yourself into that equation to say, how much blood, sweat, tears, and time am I willing to give to this machine? And is it also working for me? Because I think back then we didn't know what we didn't know and we were just running, doing, going. Now we do so much more to even know the patterns to say, well, yeah, AI is going to do this for probably 3 or 4 years and then it's going to be something else. So do I have to go in and reset my life and my titles and do all these things so I can be an AI supporter and make more money? It's like, no, you know what? What you really need to do is find that balance between, yes, I want to be part of this party because it's fun. Yes, there's a lot of opportunity. And yes, I can learn and grow, but being grounded through that process to say, I don't need to work 20 hours a day and not sleep. And I think that's what happens. And some of that's excitement. Let's be honest. It's cool to be on the curve. But I also noticed, especially when I was at Microsoft, they forced a sabbatical, which I thought was fascinating because I haven't seen that. Maybe that's more so now. This was probably a decade ago where
Adobe did it too. Yeah, you get the 5 years, you get a 4-week vacation or whatever it was. You get a month off.
But even just look at that. You have to wait 4 years to get it. Do you know what I mean? So versus
5 years. Every 5 years, you got a month or something like that.
I think it's really more about people and understanding people management and caring about people instead of the outcomes all the time and looking at those crash patterns and saying to people, you know what? I remember, and I'm sure you do too, when I finished this year with so much vacation, I get to roll over so many hours. And I'm like, how foolish is that you didn't take any time off?
We're done with that. I'm done with that.
And you know what? The Gen Zers are helping us get better balance. However, I think some of that has over-rotated as well as I'm not working hard and rolling up my sleeves. So once again, we're out of balance. And what I've learned through all of this and what I wrote in the book, which I wasn't really even planning to do, what happened was there was so much coming at me during my break that I started to look at all the tools that I had worked with myself and shared and, had read about. I was like, you know what? Because I like data. I'm a research person. I bet I have so much insight about all these books I've read and all these people I've talked to over the last decade for my own healing journey because I had gotten sick, so much stress. Maybe I really need to just put all this together in a book. It's not about me. It's about here's some tools that I don't care which one you pick.
That'll help you. Yeah.
Pick one because these crash patterns are learned behavior that we don't have to support, but that doesn't mean we don't work or we don't have purpose-driven lives. I think this is where it comes back to find your connected balance, whatever that is for you.
Whatever that is. So let's talk about, we're going to kind of go through the advice section towards the end of this, but before we get there and kind of how we can help people, I think the way we're going to address it is how do companies start to do it? And then how do people start to do it for themselves, right? Because a company can't eliminate burnout for an individual, right? But before we get there, I want to talk about your story and just your path to doing this work with others. Like, how did you get here? You kind of alluded to a couple of things. So tell us that story.
So I started my career in tech really on the marketing side initially. It's in startups before startups were a thing, in the 90s, before everybody was trying to be a startup. And so that was my first experience to churn and burn. But because I was so high energy, I was like, this is great. Oh my God, God, I'm going to be part of building something that's going to be amazing. And it was fun. And, it was new. And so it was shiny. And so we had all this stuff to do. And so, after 4 or 5 years of that, I moved into the corporate sector and started to really look at, organizationally, how are we as a tech vertical going to impact society and life? And, that's when, you're getting to a point where the internet was being used and it was live. And, we lived through Y2K and there were so many things about it. As I continued on my career up, I got into sales and marketing roles in bigger companies and I started to lead teams and I started to really care more about, obviously, when people were happy from a management perspective, they work harder. Not because I want them to work harder, but they're passionate about what they do when they're happy. When you come to work and you're miserable, and we've all been there, you're hard to work with and you don't get your stuff done, not because you can't roll up your sleeves, but you're frustrated or not happy with what's going on or the politics are bad. And so started to really look at the second phase of my career. Okay, if I'm going to be a good manager and I want to stand up and, not so much teach at the time, I wasn't teaching yet, but really help people.
Like take care of your people.
Right. Take care of your people and help people thrive, because when everybody's firing on all cylinders, we all do better. So it's the rising, what is it? The all boats, whatever the old saying is about.
Rising tide. Yeah, I don't know it either, but I know exactly the one. Yeah.
But I was always, the cheesy teamwork makes the dream work. Having a sports background, because my father was a football coach for 56 years, it was always about the team approach. And when the team is healthy, the team does amazing things. And I started to notice the more my team was rested, the more we were focused, the more we were collectively trusting each other and working together, we got more done. And so then I kind of started to dip my toe into executive leadership, where I actually, a VP of tech ops who I worked with, spun out and started to do executive leadership coaching. And he's like, do you want to be my crash test dummy? And I'm like, yeah, I would love this. And so ironically, his partner was a former executive from IBM. And so this was the early, probably 2012, where executive coaching hadn't taken off yet,
It's a huge thing now.
Right. Well, ICF was probably just, getting their things together. But Georgetown, of course, was always on the forefront of that, which at the time I was in the DC area. And so all these folks had gone to Georgetown. And so then the executive coaching thing took off. And then, of course, we got life coaches and everything else. So that was about the time I started to see the effects of the stress. And then I started to become more and more unhealthy, in a sense of I started to get sick. I started to have strange things. And then so, I started to really look at my patterns and my health, and it really came down to my stress level. And it wasn't because I was working so much, because I can do that given my high energy. It was because the self-care was missing. I wasn't sleeping enough. I wasn't eating enough. I was still running and doing all kinds of other things physically, but not grounded in a sense that I might work 10 hours and then I might go work out. Like it was not sustainable. And so after that illness, I really started to look at energetic management as far as self-regulation. And that's what got me over to heart math. And that's where I started to look at coherence and started to, I had that piece from my athletics, but then look at bringing that to my day-to-day, training mode. It was really easy to be checking heart rates and doing all those things, but maybe, and we have Apple Watches and things that do all that now, but all that data is there, but what are we doing with it? Are we watching patterns? Do we notice today I'm really tired? Oh yeah, my heart rate, are we applying that data? Or are we just saying, I got 10,000 steps today, yay for me. So looking at all that. And so then the last 5 years, when I left corporate and launched my own consulting company, I thought, it's really about the people. The work will come and the type A plus people will always be successful. But how do we give them better tools around self-awareness and around leadership decision-making as far as a healthy approach versus here's a goal, chase it? Because we already know that. We're already wired for that because we want to succeed. At least most who are in corporate business do. It's always about the carrot. But how do we do that in a healthy way? And so the last 5 years, I've really spent helping startups, small businesses, and leaders looking at, are you happy with where you are in your leadership role? And how are you treating yourself and your team? Which led me to the horse work that I've been doing the last few years about team dynamics and unbiased feedback from a 1,200-pound animal who only can mirror where you are.
That's so interesting.
And because we're so driven at work for the task versus present and paying attention to how we feel. And I'm not saying that you come to work and cry every day, but what I'm saying is when you're not wholly connected and you're not paying attention because of that autopilot.
You're just not paying attention. Yeah, you don't you don't even know you don't feel good.
Right. I mean, how many times have you driven to work and you can't remember how you got there? Or at least in the olden days when we drove to work. But, from a standpoint of that self-awareness or that presence, which in a horse arena, that's all horses are present. And so when you're not present or you think you're present and you're trying to interact with the horse, because the work we do is on the ground, there's no riding. So it's very safe.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to do activities with a horse. If you're not connected and present, the horse doesn't move because the horse sees that you're not connected. So if you're not connected, they feel you're not safe because they're herd animals. And so somebody has to be a leader. And if they're not going to be the leader and you don't feel like one, they're not walking with you. So it's really fascinating to watch the exchange with a 1,200-pound animal that's mirroring what you either may or may not be aware of, and then bringing that into a group dynamic setting where people have to work together in addition to integrate with the horse. And the ahas and what you see from those exchanges are fascinating because it goes back to presence. It's not that you're stupid. It's just usually you're not paying attention, like really paying attention to what's going on around you or with people or the feeling you're getting or the energy in the room. How many times have you been in a boardroom or a meeting where somebody's off and you feel it, but everyone's just kind of like, what's that all about? But no, it's the elephant in the room nobody wants to talk about. I guarantee that person's got something to say if they're given the chance. And if they get the chance, we'll probably share something with you that would be dynamically changing for the group. It's just whether or not you're paying enough attention to the dynamics of what's happening.
Well, and I'm really thankful for this transition. On one hand, I'm really sad that it didn't happen earlier in our careers.
Right.
And I was just talking to my parents about this, right? Like when you're working in tech, when you're working a startup, guess what there isn't is overtime, right? But that's why you get the big salaries. And by the way, in my day, we were on call 24 hours with zero compensation.
Yep.
We worked very often more than 40 hours. We worked over weekends and holidays because you don't want to interrupt your end users.
Of course.
Back then it was like you jump when I tell you to jump and you're happy because you have this job. So I'm really thankful that over the past, and it's probably been 10-ish years, I feel like, but COVID accelerated it in my mind.
Yep.
Right? That people are like, wait a minute. And I remember working with somebody that was way more connected and had way more balance. And I felt like he wasn't a team player.
Of course, because why aren't you working 20 hours a week or 20 hours a day?
I have plans. I'm going to see my family, blah, 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 whatever it was. And I was always like, on one hand, I was almost envious because I didn't know how to do it. Right. And so I'm like so excited that we're at this point. Again, I wish I didn't have to go through all of that because it doesn't feel healthy in hindsight. Workaholism is not healthy, right? So let's kind of talk about this. You talk about developing a growth mindset. Like the solution is to develop this growth mindset. I didn't even really understand what that meant originally, right? Because I always think of growth mindset as being a person that's willing to take risks when other people are stressed out, right? And that's not what you're talking about. So tell me what growth mindset means, and then we're going to talk about what employers and people can do.
Sure. Well, and growth mindset is the same kind of thing where like everyone's mindful now. It's like overused. But really what a growth mindset is, and this is where I came to this place, is when you look at positive, like we have toxic positivity. But when you look at, and that's everywhere because everyone's like, it's great. This is my Facebook life. Everything's great. My life is great. Yet behind the curtain, you're a hot mess, which, okay. And this is why don't get me started on social media. However,
do not get me started either, right? The old school tech ladies are like, no, thank you.
Well, and all that does is the algorithm's feeding, but anyway. So when you look at growth mindset, really what a growth mindset is, it's an open-minded approach to change. And that change may be something you need, your team needs, your family needs, whatever that is. But we get stuck in our patterns. We get stuck in being rigid. We get stuck in doing the same thing the same way because, it works. And I'm not saying, it's part of the if it ain't broke, don't fix it thing. However, life is going to throw you all kinds of curveballs. You're going to be stressed. And so when things come up, having growth mindset tools where you can look at something in a different perspective, or you can be empathetic towards a person who's got a problem, or to your point, you can be okay with the fact and less judgment comes when somebody says to you, I have to go leave to do X. And so that growth mindset is more about really looking outside of yourself more and being more flexible in the moment to say, yeah, this isn't working. And instead of either getting angry or disconnected or stepping away and being being judgmental, you just kind of do a Scooby moment and go, huh? And look at things from a different perspective to say, really, what am I missing? What can I learn from this? And how do I actually take this information and do something with it that's positive? It's so easy. We're all guilty of, oh my God, this sucks. And then going down the negative rabbit hole because
and doing it, even though it sucks.
Well, and our negativity bias is wired that way. Our amygdala is trying to keep us safe. But the question really becomes, maybe there's something else you're missing here. And we all know, and when we can step back from the problem in front of us, there's always something good that's coming from those things. Just like we talked about our crashes, our breaks, while they're hard and they're really difficult to weather, when we look back, it's exactly what we needed. But if you don't have a growth mindset and you're always looking for either the problem or the issue or blaming other people, that's not growing. So really what a growth mindset is more about curious learning and looking at life from a curious lens as far as being a curious learner to say, instead of blame and shame and negativity, look for tools that are going to help you reset yourself physically as well as mentally. Because let's be honest, when we get worked up, we're like, oh, and your whole body.
I just felt that when you did that. I was like, ouch.
And when that happens, your body, that's an alarm system. That's your body going, hey, this isn't good. And if we ignore that and push through versus that's interesting, that doesn't feel right. I wonder what that is. And when we dig through that for 5 minutes or breathe into it and figure out, why do I feel that way versus ignoring it, we save ourselves pain later because we're like, oh yeah, you know what? That really irritated me because that reminded me of such and such. And I'm not talking about like trigger wounds, but I'm talking about being present in the moment that doesn't feel good. And I need to look at why. I need to be like a little inspector for 5 minutes and say, you know what? I'm just going to take 5 minutes and think about this.
Yeah.
Does it matter? So that growth mindset really is about resetting the autopilot and looking at the bigger picture and the context of the bigger picture. And what is it actually trying? And then from the energetic perspective, what is the energy trying to show you? That's a whole nother side of this equation that I've really delved into that is fascinating when you look at like somebody like Alan Seale, who's talking about transformational presence, where, we always talk about, giving that invisible person that seat at the table, whether that's your heart, your conscious, whatever. His whole methodology is giving energy a seat at the table. What does the energy want to do? What is the energy of
when you have the right energy, you feel it. Talk about that is getting into the zone. And I just want to highlight something that we're talking about because we've talked about it sort of surface area level, right? But there's a couple of things that I think is really important. Part of why we're talking about this is that if you allow yourself to be on autopilot, it's the cortisol response. You write about this, right? And the big problem with that is it will lead to sickness.
It will.
It will lead to illness, like physical illness. And I feel like that's another kind of newer thing that finally people are starting to accept. That cortisol and stress literally translates to real physical illness. And I feel like that part is really important to understand. And that's why I think as leaders, we need to be thinking about this and we need to be making the changes where we can.
Well, and if you look at some of the luminaries, they've been talking about this for decades. It's just nobody wanted to hear it because to slow down is hard. And so for somebody who grew up on a track, it took me 40 years to realize that slow doesn't suck.
Right.
And I'm not saying that you get slow all the time or you live in slow.
No.
What I'm saying is this goes back to balance. And while this isn't new, we're not rewarded for being balanced.
That's right.
And I think that's the missing piece. So to your point, when you talk about teams and leadership, when you look at some of the most amazing leaders that are out there, they have some balance. Now, I'm not saying they don't sway like the rest of us, but at least they know, and we're all human. So we might, get off track on occasion. But we know what we need. It's just whether or not we can stop long enough to give it to ourselves.
I mean, it's almost like you talk about this pendulum, and we all know this. If you look at anything, any cultural phenomenon, politics, whatever, what you see is the pendulum on one side swinging almost violently to the opposite side, right? I feel like what you're talking about here is, look, a lot of that's human condition and you're going to swing both ways, but maybe instead of swinging from one side to the 180 degree difference, you're swinging from one side to the middle.
Right.
And that's your balance, right? And that's like what is sort of coming to in the focus for me as we keep talking about this. So when we're talking about leadership, what should employers, companies, team leads, what can leaders start to do to develop this within their team?
Well, I'm not saying that everybody brings their meditation cushion to work, and I'm a moving meditator. So sitting down on a cushion is really hard for me anyway.
Right.
So I think the first step really is when you think about our true business customer first lens, we need to bring this mindset to our customers as well. If we're running around like nuts and they are too, we all need to take a breath. And you know what? The more calm we are as leaders, the more people around us feel that, and the behavior will be mirrored. And so we can be our best advocate by being our best example, which is hard sometimes. But I think starting with looking at how our customers are acting, are they chaotic? Are they, and trying to, I'm not saying you're going to sit down with your customer and say, why don't you take a breath? Because, that sounds condescending, but I think you can be that example to show up at meetings that you're calm, to take time for breaks, to tell people about some of the things you're doing, like you said, outside of work, to show that you are a balanced leader and that while you do work hard and things are important that you're going to roll up your sleeves and work on, you also have that human side to you versus the old school way was you just keep pushing, and keeping pushing is going to get you sick. And so start there. And then secondly, focusing on employee retention. When people leave, because we've seen this, in fact, I won't name names, but I've been at enough companies to watch the revolving door.
30% retention, or what is it? 30% turnover is what I mean. We work with some of those companies. That is tough.
Absolutely. And you know what the top reason why employees leave is their manager.
I was going to say their manager. Yeah.
And so when you look at leadership styles, which are learned, whether it's situational leadership, you do DISC, there's so many tools out there for team dynamics and leadership dynamics, and we won't even get into. However, if you're going to lead a team, I think it's incumbent upon you as a good leader to know your people, know what incentivizes them, and to know what's important to them so you can help them not only grow, but do their job better if they need tools or training or whatever that is, instead of looking at them as a number and we just need to get this done. I can't tell you how many times I've been in meetings. We just need to get this done. And the answer to that is at what cost? What is the collateral damage of just pushing to get this done? And I know that obviously there's time constraints and resource constraints. We know that it's not ideal all the time, but I think a 3-minute discussion about how does everybody feel as far as what we're doing and where we're going? Are we realistic about what we're trying to get done? And most times we're not. However, if you're having honest conversations about what's happening or who's close to burnout or whatever that is, because that's going to happen anyway, you can at least get ahead of it. Hey, you know what, Bill? Maybe you need to take tomorrow off and we'll cover you. And I think,
and it's not punitive. It's hey, do you just need a day?
Right. But I think when we're so focused on the goal and autopilot, we don't care that Bill's 2 steps away from a meltdown. It's Bill, why aren't you getting your stuff done? So I think.
Well, and do we even recognize it all the time? Because I've had people leave who have been super burned out and I'm bummed because I just didn't even know how to deal with it.
Well, and so that's part of, whether you're having a weekly meeting or whatever you're doing with your team, which if you're not, you should be, or one-on-ones, whatever your style is, you should start with a check-in personally. How are you doing? How's things? I have a colleague right now whose grandmother just passed away. I saw her yesterday. She looks exhausted. Of course she does. And I'm you're going to take some more time. It's we need to bring our humanness back to the office or back to work. Yeah. Not so much that it gets in the way. Once again, let's not swing the pendulum. But there's nothing wrong with connecting with humans eyeball to eyeball to say, how are you doing? And not the drive-by, how are you doing? It's is everybody feeling okay? Is everything good? Is everybody solid? And you find when you're more connected with people and teams, they'll work harder for you if they feel valued and seen.
What happens when employees feel engaged? You have this really good stat.
I think I can't remember what the productivity level is. I want to say it's double, but here's the other side of that coin about, we said revolving door. The cost of bringing a new employee on is
sucks for everyone.
Right. Well, plus the time and the cost to ramp somebody up versus to keep your current team in place.
Yes.
I mean, all the stats are out there. Just run a Google search or chat or whatever. And so the cost of losing people.
It's 60% more in that first year to onboard, to pay, to everything.
Well, and that's the same with customers. When you think about losing a customer.
Same. Yep.
Why do we not do the same care and feeding that we do for our customers that we should be doing for our employees? That to me doesn't make sense, because I know why, because it's hard and there's not enough hours in the day, but that's what makes you a better leader. In addition to, or don't go into management, in addition to what you need to get done every day, you as a leader obviously need to assess, is it realistic? And how are your people, going to accomplish it personally and professionally? Because otherwise you can expect burnout, you can expect turnover, and then you're not ahead because you're constantly interviewing and refilling jobs, and you're not getting your work done.
And it's hard to work from that place. It's hard to know how to kind of get out of that, I think, for leaders. And then it's hard to sort of kind of like change the tone.
Well, and Sarah, this is why I do a lot of the work that I do. I do a lot of mentoring and coaching and teaching now, and it's not always paid. It's some of it's volunteer. Like, I spent some time at UCSD in their Blackstone Launchpad program talking to students about burnout specific. And I was handing out books. I didn't even care. I'm like, you guys work hard, but find some balance. Because to your point, I wish that I could have told my 25-year-old self. And to your point about, we've all lived through a lot of these things and I wouldn't trade it. But I wonder if I knew what I knew. Everybody talks about if I'd only known. But I also wouldn't be sitting here having these discussions. And I certainly wouldn't be, in the great place that I am to do the work that I'm able to do now. But I do think there's that, how are we helping the next generation of leaders? Or how are we giving people tools? And how are we just sharing information when people ask for it to really help people be better people and better leaders?
Well, it's interesting because I think about what led me to leave companies, and it was feeling underappreciated. It was working 40 hours at a stretch, which I can't do that anymore. My body's like, no, thank you. I will cry and get hysterical on you if you try to skip a night of sleep, right? Like, it's really interesting how that's happened, but it's brutal, right? And so it's funny because people ask me all the time, what drove you to start Tenisi Tech? And really, it was those experiences. Being told you're replaceable, which, like, let's face it, we're all replaceable. But is that what you want to tell people? Does that make people feel good? It was being told things like that. And it was also, not being appreciated for the extra work. So when I started Tenisi Tech, I thought, okay, like, what do I want to be? And I wanted to be a good place to come to work. But now we're like 13 years in, and I think I want us to be a community,
right?
Which is different.
It's totally.
And then I start thinking about, okay, not only do I want us to be a community, and for any of our employees or team members listening, look, it's a process, right? It doesn't happen overnight.
No.
And so it's like, I want it to be a community, but, and here's where I think things really start to click. Can we then bring that to our customers?
Yes.
Could we build a community through doing IT, through doing great IT, by having a great company, and then also bringing that to our customers? Like, is that possible? I don't know. But that's my big idea these days.
Well, and it starts with people.
That's right. It starts with people.
And it starts with how you want to be treated and then how you treat others. And we're in a world right now that's so black and white and polarized, don't get me started about the crazy, that a lot of people are stepping away from the political climate for this reason. It doesn't have to be us and them. It doesn't have to be, you don't believe what I believe. It's really about, where are the commonalities and how can we work together towards the common goals and still feel like seen and heard, valued people? We've gotten away from that for so many years because we were too busy working to make money. It's like, you'll make more money if people are happy. That is a fact.
Right. So, okay. So that's kind of me. I got on my soapbox for a second, and I really am intent on kind of building this community within the company. But I do still think that a lot of this is also within the individual.
It is.
So how do we as employers support our employees in not feeling burnout? And we talked about it. And I had a great interview with somebody that you're going to have to meet, but this guy, Devin Hughes, he does a lot of organizational structure work as well. And he said things like normalizing vacation, normalizing, a mental health day, normalizing, it's kind of the same stuff that we're talking about. Normalizing failure was a great one, having like
Huge.
Failure part.
That's a chapter.
Right? So those are some of the things that I feel like I'm intent on trying to do. But then how do we sort of foster employees doing some of their own work? Because I can't make you do anything. You've got to know it, learn it, want to do it, right?
Well, and you're the boss of you. And this is where...
Right? Exactly. I'm only the boss of me.
Adulting is real. And so this is where, emotional intelligence has to have a seat at the table, and we have to start talking about, you as an adult need to take responsibility for yourself. And if something's not working, you need to speak up. Or if you have an issue, you need to speak up. And I think to your point about what he said, normalizing those kinds of things, which for years were not okay, and looking at how do we actually operate as better people in an environment where we can still produce and still have a community where somebody needs a day off and somebody's raising their hand, say, I got your back, versus I don't want that. I got too much on my plate. You know what I mean? And I get it, because let's be honest, we're always asked to do more with less, and we're always asked to stretch.
Always.
So that's a given. But when you're with a group of people that you trust, that you know have your back, that you feel like
that's the hard part.
It's really about the trust, and which is why
I was going to say building that trust is hard.
It's real
because
hard.
the leaders have to check those gut instincts or those type A instincts to be like, what? This isn't done. It's like, I don't know. I also did a lot of work on perfectionism several years ago, and that we needed that. We don't have to be perfect, everyone. I had to actually read about that. I could not arrive at that on my own. I couldn't. Even if people told me, I had to read about it.
Well, but Sarah, you do, but that's because your brain's in the way. Your brain's trying to protect you, where you're in your heart, you knew that, and your body certainly knew it. And so actually, this is the time, I believe, especially after the pandemic, where we've been virtual for so long, people have forgotten how to interact personally in a same room, which is why going back to the office was so hard. People don't want to get back in an office because they can be comfortable at home behind a screen. But looking at rebuilding that trust with people, whether it's a personal relationship or a business relationship, you really, in order to build that trust, you have to spend time with people. And this is why this arena work is so important, I believe now. Like the timing couldn't be better, because people have to reacquaint themselves with themselves as well as their team, and actually work together to create that community that you talk about. Because let's be honest, Zoom is not a community. Zoom is a backup that I can't get to such and such today so I can connect, but real connection happens in person, eyeball to eyeball with people. And so if you're not going to spend that time and you want a remote job, then take one, but then you're not going to have community, you're not going to be connected, and you're not going to be in a place that's going to provide that kind of support. And some people don't want it, but most people now, I think, do.
Well, so I had, and for us, personally, like we're all remote. So we're constantly like, can we do regional events? Can we bring everybody to San Diego for the weekend? And I had this distinct experience during COVID, right? This idea that Zoom is not the community. And I was at this LEAD program for San Diego where they talk about the county and all kinds of cool things for like business people, right? And what really hit home for me is sometimes being in the room is about the small talk.
Oh, yeah.
And when you're on Zoom with people you can small talk. When you're on Zoom with people you do not know, you do not do that small talk, and you do not build any kind of rapport. And I was like, yeah, you need that. And that was for me a huge highlight. Like I had an opportunity to meet like 30 different leaders, CEOs, whoever they were. And you just can't like, oh, hey, square over there, Kathy. Like you're going to do that in a room of 30 people, a Zoom room of 30 people. You're not doing that. And so it's about being together.
Right. Or have beginning introductive breakouts so people can actually get to know each other or do things before the meeting to talk about where people are from. Or there's got that, think back to workshops, old school workshops. We all introduce ourselves, or we do a breakout room, or we do an icebreaker. It's like we have forgotten about how to connect with people. And you're right. If you're not going to connect with somebody, and I get you don't have a half hour to do that, but maybe you do, build it in. Like we ran a pilot last month, and one of the things they talked about is it's not that we didn't want to do introductions, but they got skipped. And so even the people in the group weren't clear on exactly, because it was a local group of a bunch of different people that worked under the same umbrella, but they were in different offices. And so not everybody knew each other. And so it was a missed opportunity between, I don't even know this person really. I just know we work at the same company and I don't really know them as a person. And so of course the exercise is going to be a little bit limited because there's no trust, because I don't know that. It's not that I don't trust you. I don't know you. And so if we're not going to take that time, then you have to figure out another way, because otherwise, people do things for people they trust, or people get more engaged. Like I think about all my years at corporate, without fail, once a year or once a quarter, probably more like twice a year, we would go out and do some kind of volunteer effort. We would pick a day, we would have a day, and then we would all go work, whether it was USO or plant cleaning the trail, whatever we did, it was an activity as a group outside. And what it helped us to get connected, it helped us to actually meet people outside the office as people, to actually have other conversations other than work goals and objectives and deliverables. And so we had that time to be people. And I think that's missing. And to your point, when we go to these meetups, when we don't or these meetings, when we don't spend 5 minutes to see each other or to follow up or to at least do something fun. I've seen big groups of people do a 5-minute icebreaker on Zoom. That's actually fantastic. Just because.
Oh my God. I've had to get up and dance on Zoom for like 2 minutes. Crazy. But it's fun. You laugh at each other. You have a great time.
That just like humor or activities or whatever it is really helps people remember we're all human, but we get so caught up in that we got to get this done. And I get it because time is precious. If there's two things I've learned, time is precious and so is sleep. And those two things are really hard to manage when you got a full day.
So let's go back to the employee things, because you talked a lot about this in Waves of Change. And I feel like that's probably as much personally focused, right, as organizationally focused, because it's really about kind of your journey. So like if I'm an individual, what are some of the things I need to be doing like to start to achieve this balance and avoid the pendulums and everything we've been talking about?
You know what? The first thing I would recommend, and some people have done this and some people haven't, everybody works for a company that has core values. Everybody knows about their core values as a company. I'd be really hard pressed to be able to name 3 people I know that know their personal core values. And so, Brene Brown went through this for years. And while it seems trite, it's huge.
It's tough. It's also hard.
It's very hard.
I think that's why people don't do it.
That's exactly why they don't do it, because I don't need that. It's like, but if you knew your 3 top core values and then the opposites of those core values, when you look at that data and you align your behavior, like I can tell you firsthand, I took a job that was against one of my core values because I told myself it's a trade-off for these other things. It was so misaligned that after 6 months I had to leave because it just didn't work. And so I think when you spend the time even as a team, as a group, and I'm not saying you have to share because sometimes this gets really personal, but as long as you know what your core values are or your North Star, then you can start to look at people, circumstances, and situations to say, this goes against my core values, or this is why I feel this way because my core value is being threatened. And let's be honest, most of us have the freedom gene or we wouldn't be doing what we do. And so when I feel like I'm caged or I can't do what I want to do, that's my core value is going, hey, wait a minute. But I didn't know what that was 10 years ago. I didn't know that feeling meant something. I just knew I didn't feel good. And so starting with identifying your core values, which is in my book. It's also, you can search it online. There's exercises. The way I approach it is you identify it and then apply it in a different way that most don't, where I say, okay, now look at the inverse of what that word means, because the inverse is what informs the feeling. So like if I'm frustrated, I can usually pinpoint that, my core value over here is being poked.
Yeah. Yes. I love this. I love it as an individual exercise. And you're right, it's been talked about, but it's like, okay, individually, if you're feeling misaligned, if you're unhappy every day, if you're whatever, if you're burning out, and I would argue you need hours to do it.
You do.
And I would even argue that you've got to be really patient with yourself and also allow yourself to update them if the ones you originally land on aren't it.
Well,
but if you land on them, companies spend days or a week workshopping to get to 4 or 5 core values.
Well, and
right?
I think the hardest part, and the hardest part too is your life changes. You might, have a chapter and then you pivot and you do something totally different. Then you have to check in and say, are my core values the same? And it's not because you're a different human, but you evolve as a human over your lifetime, especially over your career. What I thought when I was, 25 is certainly different than, after 40. And so then you start to look at, am I still in alignment or am I just aware of the changes that I've made? And so I think a core values exercise isn't a one and done. It's an evolution over your lifetime. And then not just knowing them, how are you applying them in your life? Because that is true alignment. And then if you're not applying them, that's usually when you can find the misalignment.
Okay, so that's the first one. Find your core values. What's another one?
I think first and foremost, outside of core values, is you need to get outside.
I love that one. I knew you were going to say that. Just so, people don't know this, but I have a list of what Kathy and I have talked about, and there's more than a few on it. So I was like, what's the second one going to be? And that's one that highlights for me too.
And when I say get outside, that can mean whatever that is to you. Nature is a healing gift. A walk outside on a trail, near the beach, near the, wherever you are, just get out. Even a walk down a city street, get out of your comfort zone or your bubble for 10 minutes to take some breaths outside and just reset yourself and your nervous system. And it's so hard to do because we get busy versus maybe like I try to either work out at lunch or get outside at lunch. I walk around or do whatever because your body needs to step away from what it's doing to breathe and to reset.
Step away from the screen.
To self-regulate if you're constantly focused 100% of the time, all the time. And so getting outside could be anything that you need it to be. It could be 5 minutes. It could be 30 minutes. I'm telling you, it will change your life if you do it. And if you can get in nature, you will even see more exponential impact because nature has a way of just moving us away from the grind.
It does. And it's something that I had to learn again, way later than I should have learned this. It was a New Year's resolution in probably 20 or 21. Where I was like, I read something that the average person spends 15 minutes outside a day.
Which isn't enough.
A day, right? And that 15 minutes means walking to and from your car and to and from other buildings or whatever. And so my resolution was an hour a day.
An hour, I think.
And your point, like doing moving meditation, walking meditation, that's sort of what I tried to do. And the other, and it's life-changing. It's like you need to fill your cup that way. And I think people don't always realize it. And then the other thing that, again, that we were talking about internally was, hey, do you have to be looking at each other, right? There was, again, a pendulum. You got to always be on camera. Do you? Could we go for a walk during this one-on-one? Even if we're just on AirPods or earphones, like, let's just have a walk and check in.
I know actually several leaders that do that.
That's a good one. And we're trying to do that too.
Their one-on-ones are... It's a joint walk and everybody's happier and it's forced. It's like, okay, we're getting outside for the next 30 minutes. Let's go.
Yeah, let's go. Okay. So that was number 2. Give me like your next one. And then everybody's going to have to read about the rest because we could talk forever. It turns out.
We could. The third thing I would say is you really need to take some personal inventory regularly. And that could be, and it doesn't have to be formalized. It can, but it's really checking in with yourself on a regular basis. Do I feel okay? Am I happy what I'm doing? Who's frustrating me? Who's draining me? Who's filling me in terms of, it's not always about me, but it's like, where is my energy? What's happening with me personally, physically? And am I happy doing what I'm doing? Because if I'm not, it's incumbent upon me to make a change. And whether that could be a big change, small change, whatever, if you never stop to check in, you don't know. You just keep
that's so hard.
It is. And so whether you're checking in, every morning or weekly or even quarterly, whatever it is, or you're going to sit down and make this formal, just like you would do, a review, say, okay, I'm checking in on my, let's say my core values, or I'm checking in on what I said I was going to do the last, 2 months or whatever. And it's not because you're going to beat yourself up and talk about what a terrible person you are is because you didn't do anything you said you were going to do. It's really more from a self-care and a balance perspective to say, I may not have achieved what I wanted, but do I still feel good about what I'm doing and where I am and who's in my life and what's happening?
Check out the 3 things that we just talked about: core values, take a walk, and then check in with yourself. And legitimately, you could do the check-in on a walk, right? Totally. And I think like the hardest part about that is, let's say you're doing a check-in and you're like, this isn't great for me.
Right.
I think people know they're not happy. They're burning out.
They know.
But they don't know now what to do.
Exactly. What's the next step? Or how do I get out of this? Or what can I do?
But what is that, do you think?
But the first step is awareness. I mean, let's give AA some props. It's like, if you don't know you're unhappy or you're unhappy and you don't know what to do, you're not going to do anything else new. You have to at least go, you know what? I recognize I'm unhappy. And usually the next step is you call a friend, phone a friend and say, you know what? I really am, I think sometimes if we don't get out of our echo chamber, well, not sometimes, if we don't get out of our echo chamber, we can't make those changes because that's how we got there. You can't do the same thinking. And so the best part about all these things we're talking about is they're free. You don't need an app. You don't need somebody telling you, a watch, a person, whatever. It's really just about self-awareness. And we're just so wired not to have the time for it.
I love it. I think that is a perfect spot to either be continued or wrap, because that's it. Really what we talked about today was some self-awareness.
Yeah.
And if you're a leader, And if you're a leader, how do you start bringing that to your employees? Because it will result in better retention and happier employees, which means happier customers. So I loved this conversation.
Well, and
I'm so glad we finally,
You know what I would say? Be the leader you never had.
Be the leader you never had, right?
That's where I would leave on it.
Okay, be the leader you never had. And this was so fun. It was a long time coming. Thank you so much for spending some time with me. And it feels like you're going to have to come back again.
Absolutely. I think we should go for a walk.
Yeah, I love it. All right. Thanks, Kathy.
Thanks, Sarah. Bye-bye.